Gotcha. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Philosopher King Podcast, Episode 9. We've got a great guest for you this evening. Um, so, before I get into that, though, well, a little teaser trailer. He's got an incredibly unique perspective on 9/11, but he also has a really unique perspective on some other things that we'll get into, like the faith and some other related topics. So, it's going to be a blast to speak with him. Before we get introduced to the guest, though, make sure to go to phoneboothpodcast.substack.com to follow all the Phone Booth Boys, all the different podcasts there. There's Here's the Thing podcast on Tuesdays. There's the original, the OG Phone Booth podcast that drops every Monday. And then you're watching the Philosopher King this evening. And we've got occasionally it's kind of a floating day, Friday or Thursday or Friday, depending, and sometimes Sunday. You've got Dualistic Podcast with Vince, and then the Phone Booth Boys go live on the four of us go live on Saturdays. So you're welcome to come on down at the phoneboothpodcast.substack.com. You'll find tabs for all those podcasts, including The Pick Is In, which is a sports betting podcast on Saturday evenings with Haywood and I. There's also a brand new merch shop where you can get Phone Booth Podcast t-shirts. And there are some really creative and hilarious designs. So I encourage you to check it out at least. If your heart moves you to purchase something, awesome. But if not, they're hilarious. It's a kick to see those. So without further ado, let me introduce to you the shorter seasoner as he goes on YouTube. You may know him from X as Dan Blue. Welcome to the show.
How you doing?
It's great to have you this evening.
Good to be here.
Yeah. So you and we've been talking almost since day one of Philosopher King of getting you on here, and so I'm glad we were able to finally work out a time that works for us both. So it's a pleasure to have you, man.
Good to be here. Glad,
Yeah.
glad to talk about whatever you want to talk about, whether it's 9/11 or short season or whatever it may be.
Well, so all the above, but I feel like 9/11. I know that was a huge, earth-shattering moment for a lot of now self-called truthers, for lack of a better term, right? A lot of us kind of began to start questioning narratives at that point if we weren't before. um, so if you want to just share with us maybe a little bit there, we could start there and then just go where the spirit leads us, so to speak.
Is that volume okay?
The volume's perfect.
All right. Yeah, so I was stationed across the street. I was technically stationed in Washington, D.C. at the only military base in Washington, D.C., which is where the war college is. I
Okay.
told Ted about this, that I didn't know who I was eating breakfast with at the time. We just, when you're young, like when you're privates and low ranking, you just don't care. But we got a nice chow hall, better than most military guys, because they were feeding all these generals and guys that they were training that we usually go to war with about 10 years later, But at the time, I didn't really know who we were eating breakfast with. But anyways, I was stationed across the street in training at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in Arlington Cemetery when 9/11 happened. I was called in because our unit is like first responders. Anything that happens in the city, when the president's doing speeches, we do security details. If there's riots or anything, we're trained to basically cover it all. The old guard there is basically the first responders, military wise, in Washington D.C. It was my day off. We worked 24-hour shifts, 24-hour on, 24-hour off, and we just rotate like that. When I got there, basically it was chaos. I had just turned 19 years old. Yeah. And I was basically the first. There was one other guy with me, but basically we were the first two from my unit posted up as security right in front of the Pentagon.
Okay.
Because the base that we were stationed at is where all your top brass lives. Your generals, like your Joint Chiefs of Staff, the bigwigs of the bigwigs. And they made us basically believe that jihad was going to be coming and like we're going to be the first line of defense to go. Like I genuinely remember feeling like that was what was going to happen, because that's basically what they made us believe what was going to happen. But me and my buddy there, we proceeded to just watch everything unfold there at the Pentagon. And just to be clear, I'll just say it off the bat. I didn't see a plane. He didn't see a plane. I've contacted multiple guys that I served with. There's a guy on Instagram, the Orion Project. He's actually writing a whole book because he's been. I only became a whistleblower about it right after the Ukraine war. For the most part, I never wanted to think about it.
Okay.
It was very traumatic for me. Caused a lot of dark times in my life. My unit was also assigned to do the remain recovery and stuff at the Pentagon. And yeah, so anyways, it was something I just never really wanted to think about, talk about. I avoided watching TV, 2 weeks prior to 9/11, or I just didn't want to see it because it would trigger my nightmares and everything else.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But when the Ukraine war started, and I watched them using the same techniques, the same tactics, right? Where they're conning my friends or family or just anyone to go to war based on false flags. And it would just brought all these red flags came back, and I was just like, I got to say something. I was like,
Yeah.
now at first, I will admit, like, I didn't give details because I did sign some pretty serious NDAs with pretty serious consequences if I violate them. And
Sure.
clearly the government has no interest in coming clean at this point, uh,
Yeah.
on the story because they're still,
S-
yeah, go ahead.
So you were boots on the ground, stationed at the Pentagon, outside doing like guard duty
Yeah,
or
that's what we
security
at first. Yeah,
when the plane hit, which we all know was most likely a cruise missile of some kind.
yeah. So I got there. I don't know. It was probably within an hour, maybe 2 hours after it got hit.
Okay.
So I remember when I came up, the smoke was still black, and then
Okay.
by the time I left that post and came back to the tomb there in the center of the cemetery, the
Yeah.
smoke had turned white. Because the pictures I have of me and my buddy, also after we got relieved, we were the first tomb guards to ever be posted in full battle gear at
Oh
the tomb of the
wow.
young soldier, and
Wow.
two of us posted at the same time. They didn't give us any bullets. That was another thing. My buddy who's writing the book there that was in the same unit. He was like, they gave us, weapons and stuff, no bullets. Like basically, told us that, you know, jihad's coming. Like you're about to give your life, and you're not going to get bullets. You're not going to get properly, you know, uh, armed
Jeez.
or whatever. It was kind of crazy. But yeah,
So
so yeah,
just for the folks watching, correct me if I'm wrong, but when smoke is dark, it means it's still burning fuel, it's still fresh. When it turns light, it means kind of run out of fuel and it's just burning off,
yeah, it's a lot
right?
of steam from the fire,
Okay.
fire trucks and such like that, right? So at first you had, and just to be clear, I don't know for certain, but based on what I saw, my buddies saw, and talking to them, 20 years later, and then thousands of engineers and experts in the field, I assume it was some sort of ordinance. I don't even know
Yeah.
if that video that they released was real.
Right.
It
Right.
could be real. It might not be real, but I can assure you there were high definition cameras everywhere.
Everywhere. Yeah. Now, did you see? So the documentary about 9/11 that really woke me up and got me asking a lot of questions was that documentary Loose Change. I think there's been like, ironically, 11 different episodes. I mean, remakings of it at this point. But that was those. I don't know if it was MIT or some other. It was a group of engineers that kind of started with them trying to build a 3D model of what happened to explain it, and it was in that process that they realized that there's something wrong here. This is not possible.
Yeah, yeah, a small world story. So after I got out of the military, I went on the streets, and a couple years after that, I got clean, and my I needed to like try to do something. So my dad was doing landscaping for these millionaires in Maine, and he was like, "Do you want to come do some light work or whatever?" Because I had some injuries, and I was like, "Yeah, sure." And turns out the guy was one of the lead architects that rebuilt the towers after the first bombing
Oh
back in the day.
wow.
And he was in his 90s, and he had slight dementia or whatever, but he was like, when we brought it up, he was like physically agitated because basically they're saying your work was trash, like
As a professional, it was an insult. Yeah, yeah.
because I mean, it just doesn't make any sense that jet fuel and fire brought down. It wasn't just like one building. There was a whole plaza of buildings down there too that went down with the two towers, all perfectly, you know, uniformly. But
Into their footprint. Yeah, exactly.
so
So
yeah,
you'll get a kick out of this side note for you. An old business contact or colleague of mine, he was very close to top brass when he went to university with some real high. Like we went to military school, and so he's still very close with a number of top brass serving in the military today. Older top brass generals, multi-star generals. I'm not giving the exact number of stars because I don't want people to start trying to figure it out, right? Um, but so I was talking to this guy, call him John. It wasn't his name, but call him John. He's in my office, and we're talking about a real estate project that he's involved in the firm I was working for, and we always had really great conversations about a variety of things. And I said to him, I was like, well, because you've got such good friends in top brass, that 9/11 was an inside job, right? Like it's not what we were told about the towers falling by those planes is obviously garbage. And he looked at me and he said, Jonah, I refuse to believe it. I haven't wanted to consider the possibility. And I was like, ask General so and so, who is best friend since middle school. I'm like, ask him and tell me if I'm wrong. I'd love to hear it. Right? He comes back at our next meeting. He came from across country, and he's like, Jonah, I got to hand it to you. He's like, as soon as I asked him, he told me the truth. And he's like, I didn't want to believe it, but I have to take my hat off to you. You were right. Totally an inside job. Totally not what we're told it was.
yeah.
And I was like, that's perfect. Now, next, I've got another homework assignment for you. I'm like, thanks for sharing, but now ask him about the form of the earth.
Yeah, good luck with that one.
it
Yeah,
took it took a business trip 6 months later, and me continuing to fill his Macallan 12 neat glass for him to tell me and confirm that the general had confirmed for him that the earth was indeed flat. So kind of a funny story. Anyways, I don't want to take
that's
away from what you.
crazy. I never
So
heard that from any high-ranking officials, especially with everything they got planned with the alien psyops. It's kind of hard to have alien psyops if people know that space is fake.
I didn't intend to Macallan him up, but once I saw that everybody was kind of at that level, and I was not going as aggressively as the rest. As soon as I realized what was going on and that he was a little bit iffy, I kind of took the opportunity and asked him. So, not as pre-planned as it may have seemed, but it was very interesting. So I interrupted your story. What you were okay? So you were saying,
I actually I relate to that with the 9/11 thing because, like I said, I had pretty severe PTSD, and it caused me to make some pretty terrible decisions when I got out, and I had to deal with all that stuff.
yeah,
And I mean, for the first few years, when people asked me, I lied because that was my job, right? And
yep,
it wasn't really out of fear back then. It was like more of a twisted sense of patriotism because I had genuinely convinced myself that I still thought it was Muslims, right? But I thought they just were trying to save face. They didn't want to admit that somehow our enemy had attacked the Pentagon with some sort of ordnance or explosives or whatever.
right,
And I had convinced myself of that. And, I saw like, the same things that you saw, right? But I avoided it because I couldn't reconcile it with my PTSD because I had been so angry at the wrong enemy for so many years and trying to I hadn't really dealt with that PTSD at that time. So trying to like,
mm,
deal with the fact that, cuz I no one in my immediate family they all converted to Catholicism, but my grandmother comes from like a place in Poland that used to be called the Jewish Paradise or something like that.
okay,
So I'm related to, them. So it was very
So
hard
would
for
that
me.
be Ashkenazi? Was
Yeah,
that the lineage then? Okay.
yeah. So I had a very difficult time reconciling that the government that I had served, that I had basically, destroyed myself for psychologically and physically,
Yeah.
and my extended family all, you know, played a role in that. And I genuinely just couldn't process that for years. And I just refused to look into it. I didn't want to know.
Isn't it amazing what they say? And it's so true. And this is kind of where I have compassion on folks who have a hard time even entering the discourse of some of these things that we talk about, is because like it is so much easier to be deceived than it is to admit that you've been deceived.
Yeah,
Right.
for
Yeah.
sure.
It's a real challenge. Yeah. No, so I
Yeah.
respect that you were able to kind of confront that. So what did that look like?
Confronting it,
Yeah.
it didn't look great. It was,
Yeah.
I went through a lot of experimental therapies and stuff that the VA was offering. I was in and out of this.
Yeah.
I was in and out of the psych ward for years in the beginning. I was quite literally a mess.
So
And
what was there a single moment that you, or a piece of information or something that kind of shifted you from being like, I can't even consider this a possibility, to, good Lord, what if this is true? I need to look into this.
the dancing Israelis,
Yeah.
yeah. When I'd heard them mentioned before, but I never really looked into it, or like I said, I just avoided it altogether. And a lot of that happened after my daughter was born. That changed me quite significantly. Gave me a lot of time to like sit still and ponder things, or forced me to sit still and ponder things, I guess you could say.
It's the most humbling experience in the world, isn't it?
It is.
Being
Yeah.
a father and bringing a small child into this world, it's incredible.
Yeah. I wasn't even supposed to live long. They told me I wasn't going to live long enough to see her be born. I actually left the critical care unit at one hospital back in 2006. And yeah, so I left the hospital, the critical care unit, against medical advice. They're like, you can't leave, you could die. I'm like, well, you told me I wasn't going to see her be born. So I'm going to go see her be born if it's the last thing I do.
Well, I love that, dude.
But clearly the father had different plans for me because I am still here.
Amen.
But,
Amen.
but yeah,
Praise
uh,
God.
I
That's
don't know where I
fascinating.
was at before that, but I was talking about 9/11 earlier, but
Yep.
yeah, so no plane, no parts of a plane, myself and my unit were all up in there, right? They were collecting bits and pieces, right? There were two types of guys there. There were guys like FBI guys, traditional jackets and stuff, walking around picking up parts and pieces, but they were all smaller pieces. Nothing, there was not one distinguishable plane part at all. No engines, no seats, and there's just nothing, right?
Nothing.
And
Well,
then there was
there was a passport intact they found somewhere, right?
they, they claim they found the black box there, but
Okay.
my buddy who's writing that book, the Orion Project, his name's Adam Heisenberg. He's on Instagram. I think that's where I'm not on Instagram, but I think that's where he's big on there and shares a lot of his info. But
Okay.
he's writing a book, and he's been, like I said, he's been at this for years, and they have come after him, attacked him. That Richard Gage guy was like a big front man for 9/11 Truth, allegedly.
Yeah.
Turns out he's more of a controlled op because whenever my brother in arms there was going to share some truth at this conference, they basically threatened him. They're like, "We're going to cut your mic, or pull you off stage or whatever." And
Wow.
because he's done a lot of research, and he found out that there was guys from our unit that ended up making a career out of the military and the intelligence agencies and such. Military industrial complex. They like carted off trucks load worth of evidence, like rental trucks and like all kinds of shady stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Debris that would most likely have clearly shown what it was. Now, I will say that they did carry something out under a tarp uh, at some point when we were out there. I don't know if it was at the beginning or because we were out there for hours when we first got posted there, but other like that was the only big piece that I ever saw come out of there. Everything else was just smaller chunks of whatever. But like I said, my best estimate lowest point, and then it just goes straight uphill into the cemetery, and it's all trees, like big, tall, older trees and stuff. There's just it's impossible for a plane to have come in at that angle. Even if you had like a Red Bull stunt plane, you're not going to fly in the way that it shows it on that video. And the
Yeah.
like that's the point that they claim that's the only video that they have. Just that's so laughable because this was a long time ago, and we had cameras. I still can't. It shocks me today based on the cameras that are available to us. But the one we had two cameras on the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, uh, and so you have Arlington Cemetery, the Potomac, and then it goes in the little Freemasonic row there, up all the way up to
Yeah.
the Washington Monument, and we could zoom in all the way into DC. I'm not proud of it, but like during the summertime, women that were scantily clothed, right? And that's how good our cameras were. Like, just to
Oh
give you an idea,
wow.
we could zoom all the way into Washington DC with that much detail. And the cemetery has cameras all around it. Fort Myers has cameras all around it. There's all these military industrial complex office buildings and stuff right outside the Pentagon. They all have cameras. You know what I mean? So like for them to claim that that's the only shot is just complete
That's
garbage.
crazy.
It's
Yeah.
absolute garbage. Yeah.
Yeah, that is wild. Well, and it's interesting you mentioned the construction on one side of the Pentagon, because isn't it true also that they had every floor for the couple months leading up to the two towers falling, every floor was closed in succession. They went through the entire building for a security check or some kind of a something. I don't remember the details, but it was some kind of a you know control.
Yeah, there's a bunch of photos of the guys like looking all happy and chipper and you know, probably were up to no good. Same thing, right? It's not a coincidence, right?
Yeah, well, so interesting because I know you kind of mentioned earlier when we were talking, you mentioned biblical cosmology, and that's one thing that really kind of I get a kick out of the cognitive dissonance, where you have a lot of people today who are like, oh, you got to go back to the all these ancient texts, these ancient alternative gospels, the ancient manuscripts, and everything. That they're like, okay, well, this is where truth is, and like the ancient ways, and we have to honor the Native Americans and their connection to spirit and Mother Earth, and so all these spiritualities are coming back, all these takes on history are coming back, but they will never come back to, it's not just the biblical cosmology, but every single ancient nation had the exact same biblical cosmology with a flat earth and a firmament over top. So it's really fascinating to me. But so how did you come, I understand like your first dabbling in truth, or your kind of first wake up was 9/11 and whatnot, but after that, how like what kind of got you to start to think about biblical cosmology differently, or did that come earlier?
No, it's 2017 is when all that started. When that's when I'd say I really started to wake up. Um, Before that, clearly, I didn't trust the government.
Right.
Anything they said or anything I saw in the news, I knew. One of the things I had brought up before with Ted there that, and I didn't realize this until afterwards. So, the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, it's a very prestigious job, and I was the 498th person to complete training since 1958.
Wow.
Part of that training and testing is you have to memorize a binder full of knowledge is what they called it, right? You have to know where like 150, 200 people or something are buried. You got to know why they're important. You got to know every single monument. You got to know what the story is behind that monument. Now, back in the day, I just thought this is our history. And I thought like, you know, I didn't, I never drew the connection. I didn't really know anything about Freemasons that deep. I knew that over probably 60, 70%, maybe even more of the people I worked with at the tomb were all Freemasons. And but after I woke up after 2017 and did all this research, I realized every single one of those monuments, every single one of those people that we had to memorize is all tied to like the USS Maine. We used to park our cars there. And I used to be so proud because I'm from Maine, right? Even though like it has really nothing to do with it. right? Oh yeah,
Yeah.
USS Maine, like every day I parked my car there. Had no clue. Like, right? It was just like another false flag and a long list of false flags that have got us to
Yeah.
go to war. And that's basically in the Challenger Memorial. I recently was going through photos a few years ago, and I found pictures I took around the cemetery. And if you look at the Challenger Memorial, they all look like they have Down syndrome. Now, I never understood. Maybe I was like, maybe it was just a bad artist. But then I find out that that's also a hoax, right? And that there's people out there living, they claim they're twins or whatever, but they are their same age, they look identical, and they didn't even change their names. Like that's how retarded they know the populace is, right? How
Yeah,
fluoride brain people are, that they're like, oh, we don't even have to change their names, like, and people are still going to believe it.
it's
But
wild.
I think they changed the faces on the monument so that like nobody would recognize them. You know what I mean? So,
Interesting.
so if somebody sees that monument, right, they're not gonna.
Well, what's interesting to me too is how intentional and skilled they are at executing these false flags. For example, the Challenger is a great example because I remember my dad telling me growing up how traumatic it was for him because he remembers sitting there at his school desk, and it was a private Catholic school too. It wasn't even like a public school, so this was all pervasive. And he's sitting there, and who his teacher. So a mirror to him, like this person that he admired, who a similar representative of his teacher is on this Challenger craft. They all wheel it out around the country at the same time for all the kids to watch on and be traumatized together. So
Yep.
none of them who growing up would have started asking questions possibly why haven't we gone back to the moon? It's been since 69. Like, why haven't we tried? And then they're traumatized with this whole Challenger thing, and they're like, okay, well, obviously that's why,
Yeah.
right? But it's just the precision and the intelligence behind the trauma is fascinating and troubling at the same time.
Yeah, but I look at it like this: uh they're not creative, right? So they have a playbook, and they always do everything exactly the same, right? Plus they have the rules, right? And their rules of engagement tell us they have to tell us that they're doing it.
Yep.
But sometimes they tell us straight to our face, and we just don't believe them, right? Or
Yep.
they'll play it off as a joke, but a lot of times they do it in some sneaky, sly way or whatever, and weasel the truth out there, so you just don't pick up on it. But I mean, they've mastered the art at trauma based mind control, mass hypnosis. I mean,
Have
cosmology
you
is one of them.
have you read Fritz Springmeier's work on the Monarch Mind Control Program and all of his related work, like the like
I
what
don't know
was
if
it
it.
the
I know I've read a lot on that because I was pretty fascinated with the whole mind control and
Yeah, Fritz Springmeier is awesome. He has a book on the Freemasons and the temple. Anyways, it's really neat. He's very very well versed.
I'm
And
sure I've seen his work because
I'm sure.
I went really deep into that. My daughter was watching that show, Stranger Things, right, and she wanted me to watch it with her.
Yeah, yeah,
And I didn't know anything about it. I knew it was like really big and popular, but like I've gave up on entertainment years ago.
yeah.
I very rarely will watch anything unless it's some sort of new show that's doing a lot of revelation of the method, right?
Right, right.
Then I'll watch it for educational purposes. But when I started watching that with her, I'm just like I can't tell her anything, right? Or anybody else really for that fact, right? For
Right, right.
what I'm seeing, I'm like, this is a kid show, and they're basically like admitting that they're taking children and experimenting on them, and
It's almost a documentary rather than an entertainment because it's so real. What
yeah,
the truths also of the spiritual world, the upside down,
yep.
like the how they're communicating very visually and graphically, how intermeshed the spiritual is with the physical is fascinating.
I say that quite literally all the time. I'm like, we live in the upside down. Like that's
Yeah,
one. And just like anytime I'm trying to like explain our reality to somebody who doesn't understand any of it, that's just
yeah,
completely in the matrix. I'm just like I said, I know it's hard to understand, right? That everything is some form of a deception, I said, but we quite literally live in the upside down. It's like that's where we live, and they've made us think that we're right side up, but we are not.
Yeah, yeah, it's wild. So I know we kind of that was a lovely tangent, but okay, so like, how did you get from to start to consider you said in 2017 is
So it
when.
started with the New York Times article when they said that those UAP videos were real and they didn't know what they were. I didn't believe what they were saying, but I was coming back to my faith after like a real dark spot, right, where
Hmm.
uh, led to like an attempt at a self elimination where I was in a coma, I died, came back, got sent back, and I was on like rebuilding my faith during that period of time. And when I heard that, I had to, yeah, I said, if there's any truth to this, I have to reconcile it with my faith. If there's really UFOs flying around, I said, I have to understand that within the context of my faith. And it was a
Right.
perfect time for it because I was relearning my faith and rebuilding it. And that's where I started was the whole UFO scene, the UFO aliens, whether it's the past lore, present lore, or the future lore. Those were the first truther rabbit trails I went down.
Yeah.
I very quickly ended up at NASA with its Yahtzee roots there. You know what I mean? Where
Yeah.
Operation Paperclip and
Yeah.
the satanic rituals and all that stuff. And that's what how it led me to that point. I went through all the UFO rabbit trails that led me to NASA and them, and then I started going down those rabbit trails. And I remember looking at there's no rabbit trail that looks too crazy to me anymore. I don't cog this on anything. If somebody tells me something crazy or if I read something crazy, I objectively look at it, I do the research, and then I make a decision.
Right.
There,
Right.
back then, I remember consciously seeing certain topics, and I'm like, nah, nah, that's too crazy. No,
In
that's
fact,
way that's too crazy.
that's an example I give friends of mine actually when we're talking about the cosmology question, especially because I remember the first couple times I encountered it, I dismissed it. I thought this is silly. This is obviously not possible. Like what a ridiculous thing. I mean, I was a aeronautical engineer major back in university before I entered the monastery, and so I was very heavy math and physics, very heavy astronomy and space travel. Like I was all in. I was 100% sold. So it's kind of funny to me when people who are like, "Oh, you flurfs don't understand basic math," and I'm like, I don't think you realize who you're talking to. Like we were all there where you're at right now, but it wasn't until a friend of mine who I respect very much, a dear friend of mine, um, but um, arguably one of, if not the most, absolutely one of the most intelligent women I've ever met. Um, but she told me like, have you looked into flat Earth? And if it wasn't for someone who I trusted and knew was a very reasonable person, I would have just laughed it off again. But because of who the message was coming from, the whole trusted sources thing, you're more inclined to be open to a strange idea if it's from someone you trust.
Yeah,
Um, that was my experience. I was just like, okay, well, at that point, I had already gotten to the point myself where I was a geocentricist. I felt like redshift was a lie. In other words, the false syllogisms of what they were concluding by the red shifting stars. There's other explanations like lateral movement to explain that. So I was like, okay. And then there was that whole the Principle movie came out. I don't know if you've seen that. Singenis produced that. If you haven't seen it, it's really good. But it's just kind of looks at the whole Galileo controversy and what that argument was really about, and then looks at the science behind it. And essentially, the most salient point there is Michelson Morley was trying to discover the motion of the Earth through the immovable ether, and they were expecting to find some kind of a trajectory because they were heliocentricists, and they
yeah,
discovered that there is they proved the ether, and they discovered we're not moving through it, and it just rocked their world. And if it wasn't for the genius that no one can question his genius, the Einstein synonymous with genius, if it wasn't for him band-aiding the heliocentric model with relativity, literally warping time and space, the whole theory would have fallen apart. And today, everybody would teach biblical cosmology.
yeah. They proved the ether, and then Einstein came and erased it. which makes sense
Exactly.
because you can't create a scarcity of narrative around power and electricity if people know that the ether exists, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Well, and actually, even just a rudimentary understanding of electromagnetics, you understand that two fields are complementary and they always exist together, with the right hand rule governing how the current flows relative to the magnetic flow. So you can't even, just the fact, if you stop and think about it, just the fact that magnets influence our compasses, there has to be a a, a complementary
Yeah.
electrical current traveling in the world all around us. It's really fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would, as I'm going down these, I came on social media. I've been on off of social media for, I don't know, well over a decade. I wanted nothing to do with it. A girl that I was out on the streets with that set me up one time got out of federal prison, and the first person she contacted was me on Facebook. So I deleted all my social media. This was like well over like 15 years,
Uh-huh.
and I was like, I have no interest of being on these things.
Right. Right.
And yeah, so I came on X because I wanted truth about what was going on in the UFO world, right? Because the government was like, "Oh, we shot down UFOs and this was happening." And I'm like, "All right, I need to know." And I went online and I don't know if it was Reddit or one of those websites and they're like, UFOs Twitter is where you go get the truth, right? So I opened up a Twitter account and that was initially why I opened my account. Every once in a while, those like I wasn't fully sold on like the biblical cosmology because, like anybody else, it's like how could they lie collectively across the entirety of all nations, all alliances? Everybody agrees to lie about this, and do fake missions. And space was very, very hard for me to let go of because I've spent astrophotography is basically probably my favorite hobby that I've had as an adult. Right, that I just go out there, I can do it all night, and it's just chill for me. Something I've always loved doing. And when you spend year after year after year looking up there, thinking it's infinite space, right, and then somebody's trying to and you fantasize living up or whatever it is, right? You watch
Yeah.
space
Yeah.
shows. I remember watching this show on Amazon. I can't remember what the name of it is off the top of my head, but it's like a space-based TV show. There's like a Mars colony, a moon colony, Earth colony, and then the Belters, the people that just were born and raised in the asteroid belt, miners,
Uh-huh.
right? They've
Yeah. Yeah.
all they can't go into gravity because their bodies can't handle it and stuff. I remember bragging about that TV show when it first came out, like, "Oh yeah, I like it because the science is real." When someone gets like I remember that's how I described the show to people. I'm like, "Oh, because the science is real," and then I come to find out, yeah, it's all fake and gay, right? But what really made me click is I was watching like a late night TV show, and Neil deGrasse Tyson was on there, and he was like talking about how the Earth is pear shaped, and I'm like, and I thought that was weird, right? So I went to go see what NASA's rebuttal was, and I was like, they don't even believe it's a sphere, right? They think it's an oblate spheroid, or they don't think it's a perfect ball. They think it's an oblate spheroid. So my brain just starts clicking. I'm like, it's a ball. And that side doesn't think it's a ball. Why is every representation, picture, video, drawing, textbook, globe, every depiction I've ever seen in my life, from the crib to the grave, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, it's all perfect balls. So that's when my brain was like, okay, that like this doesn't make sense. And that's when I started digging and
Well,
one
what's
thing led
what's
to another.
what's funny too is the irony. Actually just occurred to me. So in German, Einstein literally means one stone, and so it's almost like what you were telling. Like they have to tell you. So it's almost like they were telling us at the same time as disproving that there is just one, the third rock from the sun, so to speak,
Yeah.
is the only rock. That's crazy. Anyway, so this so you started to kind of, that's when you started to really accept the biblical cosmology, and everything started to fall like dominoes.
Yeah, so I don't have much of a life. I'm pretty much homebound with health issues. I've been that way for like almost since my daughter was born, basically, I've been, mostly homebound. I don't really have much family or friends and stuff. I got excommunicated from my church a couple years ago because of biblical cosmology,
Wild,
sowing
isn't it?
sowing division, which basically it turns out too many people were asking questions that they didn't want to answer, or they didn't have the answers to. They actually did an entire series on creation because of me, like
I
outside of
love it.
Sunday.
I love
And
it.
yeah, which and it was
Well,
just so hypocritical and just ironic how they're bashing evolution science, right? And then the next question, he's defending, a Satan-centered, heliocentric, model that science. And I tried to explain to them. I said, if you look at the science, I promise you, it's just as fake and gay or make believe or nonsensical as all the evolution stuff. And they just
well,
couldn't believe it.
and and if you look at the fundamental error between evolution, is there is no creator God. It's we created ourselves out of the primordial soup. It was us through our own survival of the fittest, whatever, right? The heliocentric model with the Big Bang is the same thing. There's no creator God necessary. It's just somehow this combustion happened, and then we all formed ourselves from that, right? So it's really interesting, the parallel between the ideas, and I connected also to, and this is a total different topic we don't have to dig into at this point, um, but I connected also to democracy is, oh, we will provide and choose for ourselves a king. Well, when has mass rule or mob rule ever been good for anybody?
Yeah.
Right. So, but this is how we instead of back in the Middle Ages, granted, there were a number of wicked kings, of course, just like all humans are broken, but there were also a number of really, really good Christian kings. And so you have like this, there used to be like the divine right of kings where people would pray for a good king, and then, God would, how easy is it for God to convert one heart of a king who has rule over
Yeah.
his nation and bring that nation back to God than it is, for 30 million people plus to all have a right idea about what's best to bring the people to God. I mean, come on.
Yeah. One thing we've proven throughout the course of time is we're bad at making decisions, right?
Yeah.
So, one of the key points I constantly make to just anybody, and I tried to make to my leadership, I'm like, first of all, I said there's more ex hardcore atheists in the biblical cosmology community than anywhere I've ever seen atheists be converted, right? For whatever it's the drug scene, prison scene, or whatever it is. But,
Absolutely.
but the main point is space, the Big Bang. Okay, so in order to have the Big Bang, they need space, right? And all this different fake science and make believe. But the thing is space has sent more people to the grave, never knowing the love of the Creator, than I think any
Amen,
deception
man.
that we're under. And that right,
Amen.
it makes the hair stand up on my skin because it irritates me, right? Because
Yeah.
like, when you actually look at Scripture, you don't have to like stretch it to fit the biblical cosmology perspective.
Well,
It's so clear. Like when you
it,
look at it, I'm like, why didn't I not see this before? You
it
know?
is, and so okay, so like what I love to talk about, like when we have cognitive dissonance, when we have two different ideas in our minds that aren't reconcilable, but maybe not immediately not reconcilable, but at least in their proximate conclusions, they contradict each other, right? So it's like this heliocentric notion of the universe, and then if we take biblical truths and stories as true, we can't believe the two things together. But then once you accept the one, it's like magnets on a table. Once they get close enough, click, they just click together. And once you believe that, like I'll never forget the first time I walked out of my house when I knew I had finally discovered the truth of the biblical cosmology. And I walked out of the house and I looked up at this canopy of beautiful celestial bodies or celestial lights, and the humble yet significance that I felt in God's eyes, that I felt very loved. I felt very humbled before his majesty in a completely different and tangible way. Fantastic.
I same way. So like I said, I do astrophotography. I've been doing it for years. Imagine going out there for the first time after, your entire adult life thinking that you're, shooting space and infinite space, right? And
Mm,
that idea you said. So my pastor and my leadership tried to argue that if you take away infinite space, you take away the majesty and the awe, right? My God's not going to create a enclosed system or whatever, right? My God creates infinite space, right? Billions of light years away and all this other stuff. And I'm like, you have it completely backwards. I said, as soon as people realize that we live in an enclosed system, there is no denying a creator. I used to think that scripture that talks about you will be without excuse because nature itself, right, shows that there is a creator. I used to think that meant because of science and we could zoom in on stuff and be like, oh, this is definitely intelligently designed. It's not random. No, it's because we quite clearly live in an enclosed system in a bubble, and that just doesn't, that's not going to be a random occurrence, right? And
yeah.
yeah, it's just so hard to get through to. Thankfully, I went
Well,
through 9/11, so I've always seen things objectively and questioned everything. I don't trust,
yeah.
anybody. So
Right.
when people presented me with evidence, right, I looked into it, right, and
Yeah.
I did have a
Well,
mental breakdown, but I paced back and forth for I don't know 2 or 3 days, just back and forth. Like I'd call it the Tomb Guard Shuffle, right? Because I did that
yeah,
throughout my formative years. For 3 years, just
yeah.
back and forth, right? So I always had to process all my if my girlfriend broke up with me, if someone died or whatever. That's where I did all my therapy, but I did it perfectly, like stone cold, right? So I do the Tomb Guard Shuffle in my house for almost 3 days, and I'm just like, who am I? Where are we? When are we? It's like, is anything real? What is,
It's
you know
earth
what I mean?
shattering. Yeah, yeah. You know, it's interesting. A little side note. Have you heard of EMDR?
Uh, Tell me about it,
It's
and I'll.
like eye movement
Yeah, 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 yeah,
de-traumatization therapy or something like that.
yeah,
So like the concept is that as you move your eyes back and forth, you're you're kind of activating each hemisphere left to right of your brain. And it's the same with audio and the same with like tactile stuff. So they use them all in the therapy now. But the idea is that you, by alternating stimulation of both sides of the brain, you end up actually connecting things and helping heal and resolve things and make sense of difficult things that you are not able to wrap your head around in other ways. And so it's just kind of interesting to me that instinctively you just kind of that tomb guard shuffle, as you called it,
yeah,
you're walking back and forth and your eyes are just naturally
yep.
that's kind of cool. um
Yeah, that was actually one of the experimental therapies I went through in the VA when I was trying to sort through my PTSD. The only one that was truly effective was prolonged exposure therapy, where basically for like a month and a half you get put in a little room and you go and you relive your trauma in detail, and that's basically what you do for like, and they force you to deal with it, and then you have group meetings or whatever, but it's all in an a controlled environment, so you're not going to make
yeah,
bad decisions. But basically, what it teaches you is no matter how bad the panic attacks or the nightmares, like even if it's at its worst of its worst, you're gonna be fine. You know what I mean? You're still gonna wake up
yeah,
soon. Everything, you know what I mean? It's not the end of the world, so you don't self destruct and make the situation worse. But
yeah. No, that's a great point. And actually probably around 2017, I want to say, probably middle of 2017 is when it started. There was the darkest period of my life, and it was everybody I knew and loved turned on. I lost everybody and everything. And what that really taught me is what you just said, that nothing, and actually, when we have our Lord as our rock, when we understand that when we've lost absolutely everything else that we can control in this life, and all we have left is Him, we'll still be okay,
yeah,
because He won't let us down. And that is such an important and such a powerful realization as men to realize. I mean, to realize in this world that there is nothing that can destroy us.
yeah.
It's pretty cool.
I have Count It All Joy, James 1 2, tattooed on the back of my hand there. And the reason I got that was because my daughter used to get really upset because I vomit very violently. And with
Yeah.
all my health issues over the years, she's had to see that. And it would break my heart that she would get scared and, shook about it.
Yeah.
And I prayed. I was like, uh, I basically begged him. I said, "Can you please make me have joy? Like even when I'm like retching my brains out, just give me that joy, right? That counted all joy."
Amen.
And so I had that tattooed on my hand. So I'm no like even if I get woe is me and I get butt hurt or whiny or
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
like I'm forced to look at that and then I'm reminded every single time that I went through anything difficult, like I'm better for it. Like
Amen.
he saw it from a perspective that I could not see at the time, right? Where it either saved me from something, right? I thought my finite understanding was going to lead me down this way, and I'm like, oh, it should be this way, and I'm upset or whatever. But he did answer that prayer. So every time I throw up now, I just get the giggles, and even though like I'm just covered in vomit, I'll look over and smile, and her whole demeanor just calms right down, and she's like, it's been that way since she's been little.
That's funny. So it's interesting. Yeah, one of the you remind me of one of my favorite verses is that from Revelation where it says all things work for the good of those who love him.
Yep,
You know, so it's pretty cool. Yeah. Um, but it's interesting. Kind of tying back to biblical cosmology, like there are certain things, like for example, in the temptation of our Lord, when he's brought up to the highest mountain peak and he's shown all nations on earth. Well, how could you see all nations on earth if half of them are hidden behind the horizon,
yep,
even at a high altitude, right? The most you could see is, maybe a little more than a third, even if you had amazing vision on a clear day, right?
yep,
But then also we're told in Revelation when our Lord comes again to judge heaven and earth, all the whole world, all corners of the earth are going to see him simultaneously. Well, I'm
yep,
sorry, if I could see him here on a sphere, you can't see him in Australia. So how's that going to
yep.
work, right? So like, there's all these little things that we're told are revealed to us in the truths of Scripture that they just don't make sense in the cosmology that we've been told, and so it kind of undermines that authority of Scripture, and it makes us subconsciously question the validity of it.
And it
One of
turns
the very first things I did is I'm like, okay, well, we'll be able to see in Scripture in the original text, in the original languages, not polluted by men's translations, but the original inspired text, we should be able to see. And in both the Hebrew and in the Greek, they have a word for sphere and they have a word for flat disk. And every single time, even if you see in the English the sphere of the earth or whatever, no. It actually says the circle, like a footstool,
yep,
right? It's every single time both texts use circle, not sphere, which to me was very important because, of the
yeah,
reverence that I have for scripture. So,
yeah. The mental gymnastics you have to do once you realize all these scriptures that talk about creation that you never really thought about before. Oh, that's just a good metaphor or analogy or a artistic depiction. No, it's literal. There's a guy that or he's not a guy. It's like a university or something. They're retranslating, or they you can look it up online. I just don't remember the name of it off the top of my head. I can message you, but they
okay, yeah.
basically are retranslating. I think it's like the earliest. I don't know if it's like the earliest full collection of scriptures that we have, like most
Okay.
accurate, I guess. And they quite when all those verses in Genesis, they say the dome, and it says it talks in brackets like celestial, like it clearly like separates the waters above, and it's not just atmosphere. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
I mean the fact that one of the best arguments against the heliocentric model spinny ball thing is you can't have pressurized system without a container.
Right.
And
Exactly.
they're like, "Oh, well, it's gravity or whatever." I'm like, "Go ahead and fill your back of your truck up with propane and see how much is left when you get home."
Right. Well, and then right. And then, the whole idea of gravity. So it's that you have all these theories, the theory of gravity, the
Yeah,
theory of this, the theory of that. But the first law of thermodynamics is contradicted by this concept of an atmosphere. So the only one of the only like laws that we've established contradicts all these theories that they have posited, and yet nobody really
It's the same thing with the gas pressure. That's like a hard law of physics. You can't have a
Correct.
pressurized system next to a vacuum without a solid container, right?
Correct.
It's
Correct.
it's just, but they just make up some theories, and then a couple years later, somebody will prove that theory wrong, right? And I
And so
was,
then they invent dark matter
yeah,
because and then so they always there's a new invention, and then quantum mechanics came out to counter all of the other stuff that they were
yeah,
discovering. Yeah,
they just stretch out the math, make it complicated, and then and the normal person is just going to look like, oh, okay, that looks legit, right? This whole chalkboard full of strange formulas. That seems like,
cool. Yeah, yeah. I'll take the doctorate degree or the lab coat over my normal common sense. Yeah, 6 feet. That's fine. That sounds great.
yeah,
6 feet social distancing. Awesome.
safe and effective, safe and effective.
Yeah, exactly. Never been tested on humans before.
I
Safe and
was
effective.
I, that was another thing I tried to bring up to my church leadership about the science behind, the heliocentric model. I said, "You remember when I always joked with you, right? Because the pastor used to be like my best friend, one of my best friends, right? And
Yeah,
long
yeah.
before he ever became pastor. And like I was the first one to write a letter to the church leadership, the old leadership, saying he needed to be in church leadership and everything else. Like, and so we had a very close relationship. But I used to just joke. I said, with evolution, right? As soon as somebody proves a previous theory incorrect, or they find something in the fossil record that disproves their previous theory, right? They just add a billion years or a million years. Same thing with the space lies, right? As soon as somebody proves the math wrong, they add a billion more light years, or, oh, the universe is an extra 2 billion years old. Because if you stretch the math out that far, it's just like it works because it's just nonsensical to begin with, right?
Right, right, right. Yeah.
It's ridiculous when you really it's really shocking. Anybody who wakes up to that stuff is like, how did I not see that? Right? How did I not see it? And it's because you're trained literally from the crib. They put a little mobile over your crib, has a little solar system, the spinny balls, and that's where it starts. Every kid's TV show.
Yeah, in almost every kids' TV show, every Pixar film, you'll see a spinning globe somewhere, like one of those desktop globes, and you'll see dinosaurs on the shelves in the background. It's always there subliminally. One of the kids shows things that I think you remember how you mentioned earlier that they have one of the laws that the deceivers have to follow according to their own rules is they have to tell you. And you could assume I've heard the theory that it's because they're trying to avoid the karmic kickback because in their theology poked in that big bluish black thing, right? And then Puma, the moron of the two, he's like, "Oh, Timon, I thought that those were giant balls of burning gas millions of miles away." And Timon says, "Puma, come on, man. To you, everything is gas, right?" So he like makes fun of him. It's so hilarious because it's right there. They're actually telling you the truth
Yeah.
in a comedic fashion. It's pretty funny.
I was very shocked to find out that there's no planets in scripture, right? There's
Yeah.
there's
Yep.
luminaries. There's no,
Yep.
it doesn't talk about planets, and it definitely doesn't talk about planets or anything. Like it talks about, fallen entities, like, or whatever, right? They all, that was one thing I tried to bring up to these guys today on X. I'm like, they're like, nobody worships Satan. And I was like, that's probably the dumbest thing out of anybody who said this thread. I said, all your masters, the one that are pushing the science, that are making you parrot it all, making you think you got all this pride and this finite understanding. I said they all worship these false gods. I think you think it's a coincidence everything they do is named after some sort of false god, a deity, a demon, or whatever. It's
Well,
not.
not only that, but even just some of the details, like the incline of the tilt of the Earth, they say is at 23.4 degrees. Well, what's the complementary angle there? 90 minus 23.4 is 66.6. So they're show. I mean, it's right in your face. Well, it's
Yep.
it's it's hidden, but
Yeah, they do
yeah,
the same
no,
thing with the speeds and all that stuff, right? Where they'll throw 60, like, they'll be like, oh, it's 66,600. It's not 66,500. Like, how do you know that it's
yeah.
like, you know what I mean? Like, it's exactly 666, you know, whatever.
Well,
What? number it is.
Well, and to tie this back to what we were talking about, UFO, the coming UFO deception.
Yeah,
What's interesting is that was a big piece for me because I was in seminary at the time, and I was like, okay, I was in seminary in California, and so I was thinking in my mind, I'm going to be a priest, and I'm going to be ministering to people in California. And as for my world religions class, when they sent me to Rome to study, in my world religions class, I had to pick a religion of the world to do my final on. I had to give a presentation. I had to study this for a couple months, and I had to do a full presentation and paper on this whole thing. And so I could pick any religion I wanted. And I was like, well, obviously I'm in California. California is chock full of yogaists and new agers. And so I might as well know should use this as the opportunity to really dig in and understand the origins of the new age and what the deception is there. Excuse me. So in that process, I found from all the new age symbolism and numerology and the patterns and everything else like that, you find your way very quickly to the occult.
yeah,
Well, but all the numbers are the same and all the symbolisms are the same. And I was sitting there in Italy. I remember I just happened to see the telegiornale, that TV was on after dinner, and I remember seeing these crop circles, and they're like, oh, there's new crop circles in Italy, and here are all these, and I'm watching, and it's all the same patterns that I've just been spent the whole day poring over, all
yeah,
the same numerologies and new age symbolism and occult symbolism and everything. Upon digging deeper, you realize actually that Aleister Crowley would seance with demons frequently. One of them he was particularly close to and would have regular seances with, Lamb. Now, Lamb, he had actually done a sketch of. You might be familiar, but
yeah,
he looks just like a gray, right? What they say the grays look like. And Lamb actually said to him in a seance in the early 20th century, he's like, what people now understand properly to be demonic possession and oppression and influence will soon be considered extraterrestrial activity and experimentation. And when you look at the overlay of where they say these different species and race of aliens come from the Pleiades, from the second star of Orion, from, the list goes on and on and on. It's an exact parallel, one for one parallel of ancient demonology and the different star systems, the demons that were associated with different star systems because
yeah.
they were tied to different seasons and times of the year and feasts. It's incredible. It's a one-to-one overlay. It's a mirror. It's incredible.
Yeah, that was that picture was the first picture ever of an what we call an alien. That and that was I found all that information when I was on my UFO rabbit trails, right? Because I went to NASA. Like I said, I found out about Operation Paperclip, right? We brought over thousands of German scientists,
Yep.
some that had just been convicted at the Nuremberg trials and such.
Right.
Just German scientists, no big deal. But they were doing satanic sex rituals in order to get the science and the technology to start like JPL, the rocket programs, Aleister
Interesting.
Crowley. Yeah. And I forget the guy's name that died in the lab there. But yeah, they were all hanging out with Aleister Crowley. And they did a
Isn't it?
whole thing on Peacock or one of those TV channels. They did an
Yeah.
entire like couple season show about that whole thing, where
Oh
about
wow.
those guys. Yeah,
Well, L. Ron Hubbard, I think, is one of the guys
yep,
you're thinking
yep.
of, right?
That's one of them. Yep.
Yeah. Well, and he and somebody else did like um, a summoning ceremony for the Antichrist that ended on a blood moon, which was March 14th or something like that. Um, anyways, it's very interesting because that apparently is the day that finished was the same day that Trump was born.
Really.
When they had this whole ceremony of the ushering into the Antichrist. Now, I'm not saying that
Yeah.
necessarily. I'm not saying it's not that it's. I'm not. I haven't ruled it out, but I wouldn't die on that hill. But I think it's an interesting correlation, especially with what we're seeing recently.
I think there is a possibility. So I think it's all theater. I think most of the
Agreed.
prophecy being fulfilled today is with the intent of destroying that, because this is their plan, right? Albert Pike's plan. They claim that that's a fake document or whatever, but everything's happening to a T to that document, the fake document. Well, in that document, after World War III and the Muslims and the Jews wipe each other out, basically, there's going to be some giant psychological operation of some sort that is going to destroy atheists and Christians' faith. And this is like that statement to me is that's a big statement, right? Because
Yeah.
to destroy atheists and Christians' faith, that's you have to have some very complex, psychological operations in the works to do that simultaneously. And that's where basically, like, I have a research document pinned to my page there about, I don't know, it's a few hundred pages where I break down all of this stuff, eschatology, like what's all the different potential future outcomes and how it could play out, and all the different modern eschatologies, how they see it, like futurist interpretations, like premillennialists and stuff like that. But yeah, so I have pondered that in great detail. And
Yeah.
the only possible way that I can see that happening is that you have like fake prophetic events, right? You make people think that revelation events are happening, but at the end of it, Christ doesn't show up. Satan potentially shows up, right? Because I believe that's why I'm a short